Hello, I'm Kelly McFarland. Welcome to Diplomatic Immunity from the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy.
My friends, I want to talk to you today very simply about government.
We need to use diplomacy and build international consensus to resolve our problems whenever possible.
Our diplomats are working with a range of partners to strengthen human rights protections.
This is not a time to undercut our diplomats.
And today, in our boasted modern civilization, we are facing just exactly the same problem, just exactly the same conflict between two schools of philosophy.
We're coming to you today with another bonus episode. This time, we're looking at the tantalizing yet potentially scary future that is artificial intelligence, or AI. In this episode, I chatted with my Georgetown colleague Andrew Imbrie about his new book, co-authored with Ben Buchannon, called The New Fire: War, Peace, and Democracy in the Age of AI. What exactly is AI? What are its applications? Why does it matter for national security and geopolitics? Will machines rise up and destroy us all? Andrew discussed these questions and more in a fascinating conversation. Come for the Terminator and Matthew Broderick references, but stay for the essential information Andrew provides us all on the future of AI and national security. Andrew Imbrie is Associate Professor of the Practice and the Gracias Chair in Security and Emerging Technology at the School of Foreign Service. He is also an affiliate at Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology, or CSET. Prior to his current role, he served as a senior advisor on cyber and emerging technology policy at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. He worked previously as a senior fellow at CSET, where he focused on issues at the intersection of artificial intelligence and international security, and served in as advisor to the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. From 2013 to 2017, he served as a member of the policy planning staff and speechwriter to Secretary John Kerry at the U.S. Department of State. He has also worked as a professional staff member on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee and as a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He received his BA in the humanities from Connecticut College and his MA from the Walsh School of Foreign Service. He holds a Ph.D. in international relations from Georgetown University. His writings have appeared in such outlets as Foreign Affairs, War on the Rocks, Lawfare, Survival, Defense One, and On Being. His first book is Power on the Precipice: The 6 Choices America Faces in a Turbulent World, published in 2020 by Yale University Press. You can also go back and listen to our podcast episode with Andrew, where he discusses this book from December 2020. Andrew grew up as the son of a U.S. Foreign Service officer and now resides in Maryland with his wife Teresa Eder, a foreign policy analyst, journalist, and producer. Let's listen to the conversation. Welcome to Diplomatic Immunity, and this is a bonus episode we have in Season 5, and I'd like to welcome to the show today a repeat performer on Diplomatic Immunity, my Georgetown colleague and friend, Andrew Imbrie. Andrew, welcome.
It's great to be here. I'm honored to be a repeat appearance on the show.
Yeah, once you get your third, I think there's like a smoking jacket or something that comes with it, but we'll have to look into that a little bit more. But so Andrew's here to talk to us today because him and Ben Buchannon just co-authored a new book called The New Fire: War, Peace, and Democracy in the Age of AI. So I just finished the book a couple days ago, and I found it to be very timely, super interesting for a number of reasons that we'll get into in a minute. But before we get really into the book and dive into it deeply, I was hoping that, Andrew, you could sort of give our listeners a short rundown on what you mean by AI. What is it, and why is it so potentially game-changing, and what are some of the applications for it? And by AI, we're talking about artificial intelligence.
I would love to. So, I mean, it's great to be here. I'm really happy to talk about this book. And my co-author, Ben Buchannon, was a wonderful intellectual companion on this journey. And he also is deeply part of the Georgetown community for many years. And one of the odd things about writing this book was we were writing it, and then COVID hit, and we went from kind of a really systematic teaming on research and dialogue every week to almost never seeing each other and trying to write this book in a pandemic. So that was an experience in itself. But
Well, I got to say, it didn't come across that way. So
Okay, I hope
it
so.
flowed very well, and I thought it was great. So
But to write with one of your friends and intellectual partners, it's a great experience. So this is a deceptively hard question to answer. What is AI? And a lot of people are struggle with this. It's something that I would say is certainly blared across our TV screens and newspapers every day. I mean, if you look up the words AI or artificial intelligence on your search engine or in your favorite magazine, you're going to see all sorts of ideas and innovations and perils and risks and opportunities. So it can seem daunting at times to try to get your hand around it. And one of the simple ways to think about it is that today when we talk about AI, we're really talking about a subfield of AI called machine learning. And my co-author and I try to give a short, direct definition of what that means in the book, which is really using computers to execute algorithms that instruct machines on how to learn from the data. It's this ability to learn from the data as opposed to just rote execution or relying on feedback that really distinguishes modern machine learning systems. And one of the reasons why they're in the news such as they are is because we've seen both an explosion in data and the availability of data online and offline, but also we've seen a really significant growth in computing power, particularly over the last 10 years or so. So this combination of widely available data sets, increasing computing power, and algorithmic development, these three things have really powered the modern machine learning, and is one of the reasons why it's become so important and so integrated into all of our conversations. As a field, AI goes back to many, many years, but at least the modern founding is in the 1950s at Dartmouth. And one of the interesting episodes from the annals of history is that early on in the late 40s, the Hungarian-American mathematician John von Neumann was delivering a lecture at Princeton. And someone asked him, well, surely machines can't think. And he replied, well, tell me what a machine can't do, and I'll make it do just that. And this whole debate we've been having about intelligence and what it means is really tough because sometimes, we struggle to understand this phenomenon ourselves. And so to step back and think about artificial intelligence as a wider field, and there's many ways to explore doing this, and machine learning is a subfield. And even buried within that is what's called deep learning. And that's a set of statistical techniques that rely on a neural architecture, sort of like the nodes in a biological brain. And these systems are composed of an input layer that takes in data like an image or pixels, various hidden layers, and an output layer. And these neural networks have been incredibly powerful, and they're behind some of the very big advances that we've seen in gameplay, but also in scientific discovery, like protein folding. So to just answer your question on applications, we've seen, really it's interesting because AI is a general purpose technology or an omni-use technology. It has so many different applications. And we have seen tremendous discoveries and innovations in the last years. Researchers have used deep learning to crack one of the trickiest problems in science, which is the protein folding problem, right? To understand how proteins fold could unlock a lot of potential for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other diseases. And the company DeepMind essentially cracked this problem recently. And that has been a huge advance. People have been using machine learning for more advanced simulations in geology and environmental science to understand complex high-dimensional data, to solve major math problems and health challenges. So there's this tremendous potential, but along the way, we've also seen that AI can present new applications for hacking in offense and defense, for new autonomous functionalities and weapons. Some are worried that it may create risk for disinformation at scale. So there is this sort of duality at the heart of a lot of modern debates about this, both the good and the perils and the risks. And so the big question for policy is, how do we make sure that we are realizing the full benefits of that technology for society, for our security, for our prosperity, but also mitigating some of these very clear and looming risks. And that's just remains to be a big challenge for so many who are interested in this space.
Right. And that duality that you just talked about sets up sort of the way you frame the book. And you frame your book by looking at the views of three different groups that are sort of based in their ideas on what AI can or can't do or should do and could do. And those groups are evangelists, warriors, and Cassandras. What are these different views and how are they important to the story?
I think we both felt, my co-author and I, that too often we are paying attention as a community just to the capabilities of themselves and not to the people who refine, invent, and deploy them. And this is really a story about people, about the human choices that are at stake in modern AI. And so we really wanted to try to better understand the debates and the people that are powering this innovation. And the way we tried to categorize the different folks who are involved in this is just as you say, through these sort of three schools of thought, three perspectives, three quests, if you will. And the evangelist really is a term we give to those who are really at the forefront of innovating in AI, trying to use it to solve humanity's most challenging problems, to push the curve of discovery in science. I think many people in this space see the potential for AI for the public good, for the common good. And with some concerns, according to some measures, that innovation may be slowing, there's a hope that AI, and particularly machine learning, could help us unlock some of the mysteries of science. And we go back to the example I gave of protein folding as a big challenge. There's examples like that that run the gamut. And so I think the evangelists are those who really believe that we should be trying to solve humanity's hardest challenges and lift our standard of prosperity and living. And so that's really an important part of the conversation. The warriors are a name that we give to those who focus on AI's national security implications. They might say, yes, there's clearly applications for the common good that are positive sum, but nations will also treat AI as they do many other areas of human endeavor, which is in competitive terms, not just cooperative terms, and they will try to seek advantage. And in particular, for many warriors, for those concerned with national security, they see stakes because there are clear risks for democracies and autocracies. And while there's a lot of nuance and division in this, their concern is that if democracies don't innovate and set the standards and norms for this technology, there's a real concern that competitors who do not share those values, nations that have more authoritarian governance models, will deploy AI in ways that risks undermining core human rights and fundamental freedoms and could jeopardize the security of democracies around the world. So there's a geopolitical contest underway for warriors, and their concern is if we don't move quickly enough, we'll be left behind as other nations race and set the standards and norms and build the infrastructure of the future in ways that we might not appreciate, value, or resonate with our populace and citizens. The third school of thought is what we term the Cassandras, named for the Trojan priestess whose warnings were apt but often ignored. And for this group, one of the concerns we identified is that for warriors, they worry about deploying AI might be too slow. And Cassandra's worry that the deployment of AI might be too fast, and we might be embracing it before we really understand its implications, before we know how to mitigate its risks, before we know how to deal with questions of bias and the lack of transparency in these systems. And so their concern is we have to make sure that AI is safe and reliable and trustworthy. And the point that we try to make in the book is that these three schools all have their merits. They're all important to the debate. And they're obviously stylized descriptions. You can be a warrior or a Cassandra and see the common good potential that AI can create for societies. And you can be an evangelist and recognize that AI has real risks. So this is really just a device to draw out some fundamental assumptions. But I think the important point for society is that we need this vigorous debate, because in a democracy, in an open society, you can't compel people to work on AI for government projects, for example. You need to win their trust. All of these schools have their place in the democratic debate. And hopefully, if they're given their place and we are learning to appreciate different viewpoints, we will create policies and conditions that will produce wise outcomes and safer, more responsible and trustworthy outcomes, for our people. So that's the device we use to structure the book. And we use these three schools to sort of dive into different debates in the field. And we really tried to give each debate its due and each perspective, a fair treatment and a fair hearing about how they would adjudicate some of these big policy questions.
Yeah, and I think it comes across really well in the book. And as you noted, that also the aspect that you of the fact that these groups aren't mutually exclusive, and a lot of these, you can be a warrior and hold evangelist or Cassandra views on some certain things, but it gets to the point of the fact that evangelists push this and think it can do a lot of good, but also are becoming more aware of issues such as the security of a lot of AI systems and the bias that you talk about in the book too, which I didn't even really think of, but is you're ultimately getting algorithms from humans and getting those biases along with it, and how to work through that and everything. And then, warriors and national security, and what do we do if we don't have AI drone swarms, but the Chinese or somebody does? And having that fear. But also understanding that, we need to think this through before as we move along and stuff. I think it comes across in the book, and you guys did a good job of showing those different arguments, but where they cross pollinate and things like that. But what are one or two of your favorite stories in the book, or one or two that you think are the most important to kind of get across?
Let me share one story that encompasses two individuals, two characters that I think really helps crystallize a debate in the field that many people are paying attention to. And that's the role of AI, and particularly its use in autonomous functionalities in weapon systems. And this is often encapsulated in the phrase lethal autonomous weapons, and sometimes in the public they call it, killer robots. There's a lot of nuance to this debate, and there's a lot of moral, ethical, legal, strategic complexities. So we were trying to think, how do you sort of dive in and understand the trade-offs and the complexities of this debate through the characters that are really involved in it? And so we told the story of two individuals, Robert Warwick, who was a former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Lucy Suchman, who is on the other side of the debate. She's a researcher and academic at Lancaster University and has been involved in the International Committee for Robotic Arms Control, and is very involved in discussions at the UN and elsewhere about how to control and prevent the use of these systems. So here are her two individuals, two ways of seeing this debate. And you could sort of look at them as paradigmatic examples of where the contours of this are going. So just to share a little bit of insight from this, Bob Warwick had been in the Marine Corps for nearly 3 decades. He has seen different military technical revolutions happen over the years. And one of the things that he looked at is the first Gulf War, which he taught, it's often called a precursor battle, because it demonstrated in a way a new kind of war using ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, precision strike, better battlefield communications, and precision targeting and stealth. And this really demonstrated something important about what he calls the second offset, an ability to use these systems in a way that would lower casualty rates and increase the precision and targeting of ordnance. And this was a really important moment in modern military history for Bob Warwick. And in his view, the only competitor that could have hung with the United States at this point was the Soviet Union, and it had collapsed. But there were others in the Pentagon and outside the Pentagon at the time who said, well, there may be other peer competitors that may soon catch up. And obviously one of those was China. And one of his concerns is that as we approach what he calls a sort of systems confrontation competition with China, they may not try to always match us missile for missile or tank for tank or fighter aircraft to aircraft. They're going to try to basically undermine, jam, and blind our sensors, our logistics, our communications. And we need to make sure our systems are as equally robust and resilient and secure, even more so than China's systems. This is a systems confrontation in his view. And AI can play a really important role in that battle network for managing these operations. And his preferred term is the appropriate levels of human judgment over the use of force. And he believes that if you allow commanders to set the targets, to think carefully about how to employ force, and then there are some entities in the battle network that can execute those that have autonomous functionalities, that will give America an edge, a comparative advantage. And he thinks, we really need to move forward on this, mindful of the ethical and safety issues, but that this is a matter for America's national security. And Lucy Suchman sort of comes at this from a different perspective. She's someone who has always been fascinated at the interaction between computers and machines. And she did a lot of her early research looking precisely at how we construct knowledge about the social world and then use it to build these devices like photocopiers and such. And it's interesting, she ended up at the Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, where they invented perhaps the most essential device that interacts between humans and machines, the mouse. And she goes, her advocacy on this goes back many years to the Reagan Star Wars program, where she was part of a group called Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, and always had a sort of skepticism about our ability to use newfound gadgets and gizmos to try to create an edge in the battle space. And when it comes to AI, one of her big concerns is that these systems in her mind are not at a stage where they can distinguish between civilian and military people on the ground. They lack the strategic judgment and intuition to make these kinds of decisions in such a complex environment. She worries about bias in the data used to train these systems. I mean, what kind of data can you get for unique experiences on the battlefield? She worries that we'll have incomplete or biased data. She also expressed concern that a lot of modern AI systems lack transparency. It's awfully hard to understand how they make their predictions. And if we can't understand how they do that, how do you ensure that you have enough trust? Or better yet, how do you calibrate trust in these systems so that you avoid uncritical trust or excessive trust or no trust at all? And so she's deeply concerned that these systems just aren't ready for these kinds of high stakes deployments. And so we talked to both of these characters, these individuals, and we tried to ask them probing questions about what the future threat landscape looks like, what autonomous functionalities and weapons may or may not mean. And it was really a lively debate, but I also think we tried to do justice to both sides and to illuminate what some of the stakes are in this debate. And for many people, I think having an understanding of where the other side is coming from can only sharpen our understanding of the trade-offs and the priorities. And so that's something I think my co-author and I, Ben.
As an example to our listeners too, I found it fascinating when you were talking in the book about autonomous decision-making in the military sphere. There was an example you gave of decision-making at maybe, I forget, some combat level, maybe the battalion level or something, in an actual conflict where the use of autonomous decision-making, again, being overseen by humans, but took a decision and action moment from 20 minutes down to about 20 seconds. And the notion of how much that benefits the side that could have that in the future, I think, was a stark example of some of the role that AI can play in the military sphere moving forward. But then again, the other side of things too, we need to make sure that those decisions are happening the right way and that there is control and we don't move too fast in these sorts of areas. But also as a
Well, can I jump in on that, Kelly?
Yeah, definitely.
There's a really, there's this inherent trade-off between safety and speed. And there's clearly, I think in the example you're referring to, one of the findings is that at times when human operators try to intervene, it slowed it down. So in one sense, you might think, well, this is this going to prove to be a fatal flaw of democracies that try to ensure that there are restraints and human level control over some of these decisions? Or is it absolutely essential? Because we've always dealt with this trade-off between battlefield effectiveness and principle. We've always respected fundamental rights, and we've always thought about core issues around safety and security and reliability. At the end of the day, when you're in the heat of battle, you want technology that works, that's safe and reliable and effective. And so speed is really only one of the measures you have to look at. There are many other considerations. But this is one of those risks, because at the end of the day, if modern AI systems confer some degree of advantage, there's going to be increasing pressure to limit human control. And so one of the questions is, how do we make sure that humans are maintaining some form of responsibility and some level of control over what's going on in the battle space? How do we make sure that we guard against inadvertent escalation at times of crisis? And how do we make sure that these systems are being appropriately tested and evaluated and verified and validated, particularly because for modern AI systems, it presents a whole new array of challenges for testing and evaluation, particularly if these systems are learning. from the data. And that requires a much more continuous iterative approach to testing. So there's a whole array of not just moral and legal questions, but bureaucratic and sort of technical questions about how you do this the right way. But the risks are also very apparent. So that's one of the big debates: is how do you sort of think about where and when and under what conditions it's appropriate to deploy and use these systems.
And as you note, I mean, that's why we have to have these conversations, because it is coming, and we need to figure out what we're going to do. As a late Gen Xer, I have to say, I don't know where I fall on this line necessarily. But late Gen Xers, right? 78, and I think, anyways. So I never know. Am I technically a child of the 80s or the 90s? I don't know how that works out. I guess.
This goes well. This goes beyond my area of expertise.
Yeah, I know, mine too. I guess I'm kind of a both, but I don't know exactly which one of these three folds I fit into. I definitely have a lot of, view a lot of the arguments and see the merit in a lot of these. But I will say, being a child of the 80s and 90s, I guess, I was eagerly anticipating the Terminator reference and a War Games reference in your book. I did see the Terminator reference, but a young Matthew Broderick would be disappointed that I did not see a War Games reference. But so part of me kind of sees I can see the Cassandra stuff, having kind of grown up and watched Terminator and War Games and all this stuff. But you end the book on hope, and which is a good thing. But why is that?
So, I mean, maybe it's an exercise in applied hope in the sense that you're trying to figure out how we can shape the terrain of modern AI systems in a way, and of modern AI systems interacting with complex bureaucratic dynamics in an increasingly competitive international environment. Is there a way to shape this that can ensure that we are, again, going back to what we said in the beginning, sort of maximizing the benefits, helping us innovate, helping us find new ways to solve problems for our societies, and to help promote partnership on really tough global transnational challenges, and yet deal with all of the risks that we've been talking about. And there's actually another Georgetown colleague of mine, Charles King, who had an interesting line, which was in one of an article he wrote. He said, the antidote to hopelessness isn't hope, it's planning. And one of the things we try to do at the end of the book is sort of lay out a roadmap or a plan for how to think about some of the big policy decisions and trade-offs that we're going to face now and in the coming years. And so we tried to sort of step back and say, the field of modern AI is malleable. It can be shaped in ways that are conducive to our fundamental values and interests. And so we looked at three sort of big areas: people, technology, and geopolitics. And we asked, are there ways for us to be creative and thoughtful and to have wise policies about how to shape this field? And I won't go into too much detail on this. I think a lot of it's spelled out in the book, but there are some fundamental propositions that we ought to be paying attention to as a society. On people, right? This is a book about people and the choices we make. We need to make sure that we invest in the talent from early years right through vocational schools and community colleges, through colleges and universities and technical training. There is a lot that we need to do to build up our own talent base, and to make sure that we're investing in talent, not just because it's important to stimulate innovation, but also to have diverse talent, so that we're thinking about how to create pipelines in the future that pull from all sectors and segments of our society. We need to invest in basic research and applied research to keep pushing innovation forward. But we can also think about ways to innovate that are reflecting our fundamental values. So there's an interesting space of research called privacy enhancing technologies for trying to answer questions using data you can't see. We often think there's a tension between data analysis and data privacy. There's a new basket of sort of technologies, methods, and mathematical approaches that might help you actually do really interesting research and learn insights from data without seeing it, trying to still preserve the privacy of individuals in those data pools. We can work together to try to promote trustworthy AI and deal with some of the bias in these systems, and be much more cognizant of the trade-offs. And we can also be working together with other democracies on standards, on collaborative research, on interoperability, and on looking at ways to protect some of our technological gains. And I think one of the things we've seen recently is that tools like export controls and investment screening, they're in the news like never before, in part because the capabilities that underlie modern AI systems, computing power, data, and algorithms, especially computing power, that's concentrated in the hands of a couple key nations around the world. And if those nations work together to try to make sure that certain chips and certain underlying technologies for computing power aren't misused or applied for malign ends, that can have a tremendous influence as well. And of course, there's trade-offs for all of these debates. But this is an opportunity for like-minded countries to work together to try to both realize some of AI's great benefits for science and the common good, and also to make sure that it's not being used in ways that are going to undermine democracies and fragment countries, or even challenge fundamental norms around human rights and our basic freedoms. So that's sort of what we try to lay out at the end as a picture of where this could go in the future. And I've been enjoying sort of having debates about this, and also teaching it and learning from students about how they see the problems as well.
So we'll get you out of here on this last question, and you are uniquely qualified to answer this one. But this season 5 of our podcast, we've talked about multilateralism and have looked at the UN and some regional bodies, and we will look at some issues that are dealt with through multilateral avenues. But you just came out of a stint working at the U.S. UN office in Washington, dealing with tech issues. What role, if any, do you see the international arena playing in this?
One way to get your mind around why the UN system matters, why international organizations matter, is to think about what does it really mean to lead in AI. We often hear this phrase a lot, and it seems abstract. One way that I've thought about it is we can think about the core capabilities that we've been talking about: data, algorithms, computing power. We can think about the critical enablers of this technology, so our workforce, our commercial investments, our R&D. And then we can step back and think about the ecosystems that sustain and support this technology writ large. So think about our education systems, our immigration systems, our network of alliances and partners. And I would add to that list our international organizations, right, that sort of shape the environment into which we deploy these systems. And I would say that there's a lot happening at the international level across the UN system, but also places like the OECD, that are really making important decisions about the principles that should guide the design, development, and deployment of modern AI systems. And so I was really eager to contribute to this at the US mission to the UN. And one of the noteworthy things is that tech policy in general across the UN system is not always on the radar of people in Washington, D.C. It's not always something that people are writing reports about or thinking about, but it's a really critical space because this is a system that brings together all the countries of the world, including many smaller countries that don't necessarily engage across the board at every single institution. Many countries look to the UN for guidance and for knowledge about where and when and how these systems are being deployed. And on top of that, this is a place that brings together all the major powers, even countries that deeply disagree with one another. And it's a venue for clashing visions about the future for our deployment of digital technologies, the design, development, and deployment of these capabilities. And so it's really important that we engage. And I would just say right now, there's a whole host of major debates that are happening, whether that's on cyber norms, right, in the framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace, big negotiations on a cybercrime treaty. There are major discussions at a place like the Human Rights Council on how to think about human rights online. There was a privacy enhancing technologies lab that was stood up at the UN Statistics Division. There are conversations around lethal autonomous weapons at the group of governmental experts in Geneva at the UN. And there are major debates around digital inclusion and connectivity and development to make sure that other countries can benefit from and access some of these tools to help them on everything from weather and climate modeling to thinking about basic applications that can improve the well-being of their people. And so this is a place where it's important for us to be engaged, to understand as citizens what's going on, and to follow the debates and to help contribute to them. So I think it's one of these areas that we don't always tend to pay attention to when we're talking about the big questions of geopolitics. But in many cases, a lot of these conversations are happening at an international level. It's important to be present and engaged there too.
All right, Dr. Imbrie, always an enlightening conversation. I want to thank you again for joining us on Diplomatic Community, and everybody go out and buy the book, The New Fire, War, Peace, and Democracy in the Age of AI. Thanks, Andrew.
Great. It's so good to be with you. Thanks, Kelly.
A sense of hopefulness is always a good way to end a conversation. There are myriad but essential questions the United States government, those who work on AI, and others need to make in the near term to ensure that our future is one in which AI makes us smarter, safer, and more secure, not less so. Andrew's new book is an important part of the puzzle as it explains and discusses these issues for a broader public. I'd like to thank him once again for joining us. Be sure to continue to listen to Season 5 of Diplomatic Community as we tackle the issue of multilateralism. Until we meet again. This episode was produced by Daniel Henderson. Thank you to the Carnegie Corporation of New York for their support for this podcast. Be sure to check out any episodes you may have missed via our website. Please rate, review, and follow this podcast wherever you listen, and tell your friends and colleagues to come find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else they listen. Follow us on Twitter @GU Diplomacy and visit our website isd.georgetown.edu to learn more about our work.